Austin. So I'm Scott Cole with Collectivity. We're actually a cloud software tech cooperative that helps nonprofits and foundations that are trying to accelerate their mission delivery and amplify their outcomes. So I'm here as a representative of MNvest, and you'll hear a little bit more about what that connection is. And with me today is Zach Robbins, an attorney with Winthrop and Weinstein. He was one of the co-authors of the legislation that was introduced and passed last year, which became known as the MNvest bill. So he will be here at the end of the presentation to update us on the status of the implementation of that bill. And Zach and I, along with 4 other colleagues, are volunteer board members of MNvest.org. And MNvest is an education and advocacy nonprofit. So we'll distinguish more about MNvest's role in relationship to that ecosystem. So we're here today to provide a really brief overview, and hopefully in the Q&A get a little bit deeper. And also to have you help us figure out how MNvest is going to be successful in rolling out over the state of Minnesota. So how many of you here have heard of crowdfunding? Just raise your hands. Okay, great. And how many have actually used crowdfunding? About half, okay. So until recently, crowdfunding was strictly donation or reward-based, which means that people got a gift or a product in return for their participation. So MNvest changes the game and introduces a revolutionary new option. Once the final rules and guidelines that the Commerce Department will issue are in place, all Minnesotans will have the opportunity to make investments in companies who've met the offering criteria and who have listed those on a web portal. Previously, securities laws were geared toward accredited investors, those who earn $200,000 as individuals or $300,000 a year as jointly, or have $1 million in net assets. Consequently, it's been very, very challenging for non-accredited investors to buy a stake in private business. Of course, there will be limits, which Zach will talk about, for non-accredited investors, but MNvest creates an extraordinary opportunity for both the potential new investor as well as the small business owner. So before we go on, I'd like you to remember a number, 23 trillion. So remember to ask me that, ask about that at the end. So why do we need MNvest? Capital is the lifeblood of all businesses, large and small. But unfortunately, small businesses find it substantially more difficult to gain access to the cash they need to grow. And this is particularly troubling when you consider that small business accounts for 99% of all the employers in the United States. And they employ half of all the private sector workers and create 60 to 80% of all of the net new jobs annually. And they contribute 45% of all the private sector payroll and 50% of all the non-farm US GDP, $6 trillion annually. But in spite of all of those impressive numbers, you can see by the chart on the right that, or on the left, excuse me, that owners usually have to find money through personal means and find it very difficult because borrowing criteria is very tight. Debt is usually unsuitable for startups because they don't have any collateral, they don't have a track record, and they don't have revenue in order to move forward. So, what do we need now? So the introduction of investment crowdfunding, we've opened up a new pathway to small business. The MNvest law, along with the Commerce Department rules, will provide a framework for the launch of web portals to automate the transaction process, much like other reward-based crowdfunding. Our job is to promote the success and provide education, advocacy, and support, and do that for the potential portal operators so they know how to apply, how to get approved, and launch their sites, as well as help the potential investors find those portal operators and know what to do once they get there. Our intention is to serve as the conduit in this new ecosystem and connect the parties, the buyers and the sellers, and the various service providers that want to make sure that this whole process is successful and also meets all the compliance requirements. So what are we doing? We are launching a brand new website that will serve as a complete resource to our community and our potential portal operators, investors, service providers, and most importantly, the small business issuers who are looking to raise money to help grow their businesses. We would urge you to go to our existing website at MNvest.org and sign up as supporters. And in the coming weeks, you'll hear news about the launch of the new site and updates relative to the Commerce Department's progress on releasing their guidelines. So what do we need now? It's pretty simple. We need lots of people to understand the basics of MNvest and to be sharing this new option of raising capital for small businesses in Minnesota. Each of you can be ambassadors simply by mentioning it to a colleague, sharing it with people on a daily basis. Second, we need to identify portal operator prospects, candidates who have surfaced so far and expressed interest typically have come from a particular market segment or sector, like commercial real estate, for instance. So think of those people that you know who may have manufacturing businesses, small service industry businesses, distribution companies. Maybe even one of you in this room could be a portal operator. And we need to identify companies who want to raise money. So helping them prepare to make an ask to the community for investment. So in summary, MNvest is designed to increase the investment capital for small business using internet as a crowdfunding vehicle and allowing non-accredited investors the opportunity to engage in the process and create tighter connections between the local business community and the people those businesses employ and serve. Thank you. So, time for some Q&A.
Thank you very much, Scott. You summarized pretty well what your ask was here from the community.
Right.
And so I'll ask the audience if you have questions that relate to that, how you can be participating and helping MNvest here. I'm going to bring the microphone around to all of you who have questions so we can capture your questions on audio.
Thanks. This one. All right, thanks for coming out, guys. This is really cool. One of the questions is, do we have finalized rules for portal operators? What do they have to show? How much money can they make? Do they have to be nonprofit? Can they be for-profit? All the things that you need to know. Is there a requirement to show everybody where you're spending your money and how you're spending your money when you're an operator?
Great questions. Thank you. So first off, thank you so much for being here today and listening to our spiel about MNvest. We're very passionate about this, and it excites us to see so many folks who'd like to be here and learn more. So the question is in regards to the rules that the Department of Commerce is drafting for this system. So just to sort of zoom out here, we passed a law last June. The law is on the books today, but shortly afterwards, the Department of Commerce, who's going to oversee this exemption, decided that they wanted to draft rules for the system to be able to sort of supplement the law itself. The Department of Commerce drafted rules and published them in mid-November 2015. They are posted on the Department of Commerce's website. There was a comment period that expired on December 31st, 2015. The Department of Commerce did receive comments under the system for their rules, and they have since tweaked rules, haven't shared the final version with us yet, so I can't precisely answer your question, unfortunately. The rules are apparently on the governor's desk for his approval, so that's good news. There's a few additional steps involved, but to get to the real meat of the question, I'm going to have to make some assumptions here. I'm assuming that, yes, the final rules are going to dictate the process for how a portal, how a prospective portal operator becomes a portal, meaning what form do they fill out? What type of information do they need to provide? how often do they need to provide the state with information? I'm guessing it's going to be on an annual basis. And with respect to your question about compensation, what I can say is I think that the rules may simply mimic what the law itself says, which is that a portal operator who is not a registered broker-dealer with the SEC and FINRA, which is a very high standard, that portal operator cannot receive transaction-based compensation. What does that mean? They can't receive a commission. However, a portal operator can still charge a flat fee or charge a flat fee plus a monthly fee. If you say, look, I'm going to go through all the effort to build this platform to create an opportunity for every life sciences business to raise money on lifesciences.mn, and I'm charging $10,000 per offering, that's totally okay. You just can't charge 10% of all the proceeds that are raised. But excellent question, thank you.
With traditional like Kickstarter campaigns or something like that, you actually run a campaign, and then if you don't reach the amount, none of that money is invested or used. Is that going to be similar to this?
Yeah, so great question. The way that we refer to that here is having a minimum for each offering. And so within the MNvest law, which if you're curious enough to look it up, it's 80A.461 in our state statutes, we do mandate that there is a minimum amount, a target amount that each company has to raise to break escrow. So the question is, what is that amount? Well, we did not legislate what that amount is. We thought that that would be a huge error. I've done business in other states like Arizona where the minimum amount is 80% of the maximum amount. It's a pretty arbitrary number if you ask me. So what we say in the law is that each company needs to figure out on their own the minimum amount that they need to raise to execute their plan. So just to use an example here, if I'm going to launch a brewery and I need to buy a piece of property for $200,000 and outfit it with $150,000 of equipment and then $50,000 of furniture, fixtures, and other stuff, that's $400,000 right there. So I can't in good faith say, yes, our minimum is $50,000 and we're going to close on that. So what's going to happen is each company is going to have to determine their own minimum. They're going to have to put that in the offering documents, which they'll be sending to the state and posting online on whichever portal. So there's sort of a double standard to ensure that each company is being honest about it. Great question, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. In back. Back there.
In the other states where crowdfunding for equity has been approved and is in place, are you seeing firms that are SEC and FINRA approved running the portals? Are you seeing new companies starting up in that? And are you seeing any companies that are kind of doing this across a number of different states where they're saying, hey, we figured out how to do this in Arizona, we just need to tweak our business a little bit now to be doing it in Minnesota instead?
Sure. Once again, great question. So this is now legal in about 30 different states, and so it's been a great opportunity to have sort of a laboratory in each state to see how it all works out. To answer your first question, no, I have not seen companies that are becoming SEC funding portals and then launching in each state. I think that's a good thing because becoming an SEC registered funding portal / FINRA registered funding portal involves a great deal of cost, time, and compliance, and I would not advocate for any startup to jump into that space. So I think it's a really beautiful thing that we actually have this state system where if I'm interested in launching a funding portal for high-tech startups or for companies based in a 10-county area, I can launch in a state without having to become a FINRA registered and SEC registered firm. However, assuming that my funding portal takes off and I have a dozen different offerings that are successful each year and I'm ready for the prime time to launch either nationally or across multiple states, then I think that would be the proper time to seek filing with the SEC.
I'm actually asking the reverse. Are there companies that are already SEC registered who are saying this is a new line of business?
I'm not aware of any. The traditional broker dealer that is already SEC registered prior to this whole new space of crowdfunding portals, they're likely never going to jump into this space. I'm sort of making a broad assumption here, because the amount of capital we're talking about is so small. I mean, I think it's large for smaller companies and for startups trying to raise 1 to 2 mil, but it's in all truth, it's too small for them. It's not a market that they care to play in, because they're not going to receive the type of compensation that they need to be able to pay their own costs and to be able to pay to be a SEC firm. Yes, sir.
Let me bring you the mic, please.
I was considering Kickstarter, and I was wondering if you could go through maybe some of the pros and cons of, say, something like Kickstarter versus what you're starting here.
Sure. Kickstarter is awesome. I recommend anyone and everyone do Kickstarter. The biggest fault of Kickstarter is that if you fail, it's very obvious. You can fall flat on your face and everyone's going to see it. But it's the closest thing to free money that you're ever going to find. You're not giving up any percent of equity of your business. You're not issuing any formal debt for your business. Certainly there are liabilities that your business is going to undertake to provide whatever materials or services that you are guaranteeing to a contributor. But Kickstarter is an excellent way to sort of dip your toes into crowdfunding, and I think it's sort of a natural precursor into the space that Scott and I are talking about, which is investment crowdfunding. Now, why I think it's also important is because Kickstarter naturally has a ceiling on it, because your contributors are pretty much giving you money because they believe in you and they support you, but there's no return on investment. And so more likely than not, the contributions are going to hit a ceiling at $150 or $200 or whatnot. Whereas in the space that Scott and I are in, this is investment crowdfunding, where you are, quote unquote, guaranteed a return by the companies. And so more likely than not, you're going to see checks written in the thousands. In fact, if one were to conduct an investment crowdfunding campaign under MNvest or any other similar law, I wouldn't recommend that that company dip below $1,000 per any investor. Just because when you think about the time involved, the admin costs, both legal and accounting, to be able to, and the time spent to answer questions from an investor relation standpoint, it's not going to make sense to have a cap table of 1,000 different people with $100 each invested.
While we're in between questions, I wanted to point out something that is important here, is that it's not essential that you be a portal operator in order to do an issue. An individual company can also go through this process and put up their own portal and do their own offering. So that is a segment of this that, you know, we could happily answer questions about as well.
As I recall, the maximum amount that an unaccredited investor can invest is $10,000. If you want to raise $2 million, that's a lot of investors. Would a business really be interested in having that many minority shareholders associated with the business, or is this really limited to friends and family as investors?
That's a good question. So my take on that would be a live example that we had, you know, right up in Northeast Minneapolis with Fair State Brewing. And while that was not an equity crowdfunding on a portal, it has a similar complexion. The neighborhood got together and raised almost $300,000 to buy some property. And the neighbors all put in $1,000 each in order to do that. They renovated the property, and now it's the home of 3 co-ops, Fair State Brewing, a bakery, and a bike shop. So that was an example of how this kind of process can work. And a single issue. The legislation wasn't, and a platform was not available at that time, but I think that there is an opportunity for that kind.
Very good question, which is, look, if it's capped at $10,000, you're going to have a cap table with a ton of investors. And I think practically, the vast majority of investors are going to be non-accredited. However, I believe the bulk of capital will come from accredited investors. So the purpose of MNvest is to provide an offering type for both accredited and non-accredited investors. And so far, we've been sort of testing out MNvest using a similar law called SCORE, S-C-O-R. It stands for Small Corporate Offering Registration. We have 2 different breweries who are conducting offerings presently. And what you see is that by number, the majority of investors are non-accredited. However, the bulk of the capital is coming from accredited investors. So I think it's a nice way to provide both accredited and non-accredited investors to fund a company, but keep in mind that those who can write the large checks are probably going to write the large checks.
With other forms of investment, you're talking to angels or something like that, and you make your presentation, they pick a fistful of them to go, and 8 of them bomb and 2 of them are successful. With your criteria, there's going to be a check cut. What happens if it doesn't work, and how do you figure out which ones are good investments and which ones are crappy investments? Do you guys offer an assessment? Do you evaluate the presentation? Or is it word of mouth and ABC company is out there and I've heard about them and I can come to MNvest to invest in ABC company if that's what I want to do?
Sure. So no, we will not be providing any investment advice. We are not a registered investment advisor. It is truly buyer beware, and it'll be an educational process for the public to figure out what types of investments that they ought to invest in and which ones that they shouldn't. I will say, and this is just my own personal opinion, that an angel investor who is investing in, say, 10 companies in hopes that 2 of those companies or one of those companies takes off, 2 or 3 companies provide their money back and probably 6 or 7 fail. I think that those types of investments are going to be riskier because the angel investor or the venture capitalist, they're going for home runs. They're trying to choose 10 companies that are going to be the next Facebooks, Googles, et cetera. However, here I believe that the types of companies that we're going to see are going to be more traditional types of companies. Sure, there's going to be high-tech startups, life science startups. There's also going to be coffee shops, bookshops, restaurants, companies that are more likely to return 1, 2, 3 times your capital rather than 10 times. So I'm hoping that with the more traditional types of companies, there are going to be less failures, but certainly can't guarantee that. There are going to be many failures here. And our goal here isn't to try to legislate against failure. That's impossible. We are adamant that every individual in this state should have the opportunity to back a company at the ground level. And for the past 80 years, the system has been rigged to only allow, for the most part, the accredited investors. And right now, there's a huge income inequality in this country. And personally, this is my own 2 cents, I think part of that is largely due to the fact that the commoners, the 97% of the population of which I'm a member of, haven't had the opportunity to back companies because the SEC has determined that I'm not sophisticated enough to be able to do so. I think there's a question back here.
I wanted to address your question. This isn't meant for $2 million investments in one company. What it's really meant for are if a company is looking for $2 million, this is to get you partway there and to get you a prototype, to get you those types of things. If you're looking for $2 million, that's generally, you would go to an angel or a group like that. And if you want over $10 million, then you go to venture capital. But for $2 million, this generally isn't going to get you there. I only know one group out east that is doing this, and it's doing it with life sciences. And at the $1 million level.
And I would just add to that if a company has the ability to solely raise money from accredited investors, I would recommend they do so 9 out of 10 times. Not 10 out of 10, but 9 out of 10, because the company is going to be more than likely better off to have a smaller list of investors, a smaller cap table, not to have to deal with all the issues of transfers of units in a company and so forth that one's going to have to deal with a list of more investors. That 1 out of 10 times, and it might be 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, is truly where I think the power of the people is of utter importance here, where having 100 investors in your company truly is going to take your company from here to here. And that's a very powerful statement. But that's not going to be for every company. Question back.
Good morning. I'm here from Wisconsin today with 2 cards. One is a executive director of an angel network, and I also have a company called Muskie Tank, which works with startup companies. And I've looked quite a bit at the crowdfunding in Wisconsin because we have an equity opportunity there as well. And first of all, from the angel perspective, and this leads into the question, is that we've been nervous about investing in crowdfunded equity or general solicitation type opportunities because we don't know what the rules are going to be from the SEC or from the state of Wisconsin or the state of Minnesota as we move forward that might shut down the ability to raise more funding. So we don't want to be the angel that put in $200,000 as that midpoint on the way to $1.5 million and have the SEC come in and say, you didn't report something right per Reg D and now you can't raise any more money for a year. Doesn't feel good to be the last dollar in. So we're nervous about that on that side. On the startup side, I tend to say, take a look at how much money you need, and if you can do the reward-based crowdfunding, that's the way to go first. If you do the equity, be sure to understand the rules on, like in Wisconsin, I think there is a limit on where the investors are from if they haven't changed that. And they have the portals. I think there's 6 portals in Wisconsin and probably 6, maybe a little more of companies that have actually used it. But so the question for Minnesota is, what's the reporting requirement, and is that different from what you would do if you were just going for a Reg D angel investment? And how does that tie into the SEC, if that doesn't put you on too much of a tangent?
Sure, it's a great question, something that we focused heavily on when we were drafting the law. Basically, the Reg D system that the questioner is referring to is the main way that companies raise capital presently. And so we had to be cognizant going through this process that if we were to adapt so far from where we currently are, that no one's going to use this new system because practitioners are very set in their ways and they're conscious of how much capital you have to spend on attorneys and accountants and so forth. So under Minnesota's law, there are no ongoing reporting requirements for the issuer, okay? Because we didn't feel, once again, it was fair to say, all right, this LLC has to now report for the next 50 years, whereas this LLC who raised money under the old system doesn't have to. The federal law, which goes live on May 16th, called Regulation Crowdfunding, does have ongoing reporting requirements for the issuer of the units or shares in the company. And keep in mind that as an investor in a company, if you own shares or units in a company, you have access to the books per state statute. You have all sorts of information rights. And so we are relying on those rights for an investor to receive feedback in the company. But we did not feel it was our job to legislate how a company communicates with their investors. Do you
supersede that, or I suppose they would ultimately?
No. So good question here. So there's the federal system called Regulation Crowdfunding, and if you opt into that system to raise capital for your company, that's sort of your playing field, right? You're taking advantage of that law and that regulation, which once again goes live on May 16th. But if instead you were to choose MNvest or the Wisconsin law, which doesn't quite have a name, you would be within those systems. And so each system is mutually exclusive of each other. There's no superseding of the federal system over the state system.
We're running a little short on time now, but we have for one more question here.
A lot of pressure. So this isn't, I'm not as familiar with all this kind of Latin discussion about regulations and stuff, which is great, but if you're somebody who's a brand new investor, maybe you don't have a parent, like maybe some of the young people that are here, and they have a great idea and they've got a business plan, but not the savvy, the know-how about, am I going to be violating something? What's my cap table? All these things that you're going to be pretty naive about unless you have a real close advisor. Is that something that MNvest is that a piece of that too for that person that, again, isn't experienced in this field? Or is it kind of the expectation that, as an entrepreneur, you're going to need to learn all this stuff and figure it out through mistakes, and or is that something that MNvest is also passionate about?
Well, our website is education and advocacy and support. So that is the total focus. We're going to have a lot of information on the how-to stuff, as well as conduits to the service providers who can provide additional support, like Zach, beyond what we're providing on our website. My experience as a business person would be in this community that you'd find an accelerator program or some other kind of program that has a larger circle of wraparound services, and that one of those things that they would be looking to then would be MNvest as an element of a larger recipe for success. And we'll have that information on our website, and we'll be there to support via the website. We're not going to have a phone answering center or anything like that to take questions. Probably somebody who will be answering emails, but that's the extent of our capability at this point in time.
I would just add that we would like to offer workshops, and we've had those discussions within our board. We're not quite there yet, but I have a helpful sort of one-pager that I'd be happy to share with anyone here in the audience, which is just titled Planning for Your Offering. And we break it into 4 different sections. Now I'm on the spot, I'm going to forget all 4, but namely, putting together your business plan is the first way to start off with anything. Okay, so nothing's changed in that respect. You have to have a business plan, and the business plan is going to have to explain, obviously, where you've been and where you're at now, but where you plan to go and how you're going to get there. So that's sort of the core. The first time that we meet with anyone, we say the first thing you need to work on is a business plan. The second thing that the company itself controls, in our opinion, and this is later down the line, is the marketing of the offering. Attorneys like me are going to help you put together the offering documents such that you are compliant with the law. But the 6 inches or however thick documents I'm going to put together for you aren't going to help you sell a single share. That's going to be up to you and your partners, marketing firms, advertising firms, social media firms, etc., to figure out your strategy to be able to solicit investments from the public. The other 2 aspects of it are legal in nature of this one-pager that I'm talking about from a compliance and a regulatory standpoint, but I'd be happy to share that with anyone as sort of a first start to figure out the landscape. Thank you so much for having us here today. Thank you, James J. Hill Center. This was awesome.